So, I thought we might try something a little bit different today, something I've never done before. Live contemplation. So, okay, you'll have to bear with me, okay? This might be a little bit different to anything you've seen before. So, I've recently become aware of a problem that some people have with regards to letting go of trauma, or rather seeing into the nature of trauma to the point where they can let go. And I didn't realize that there were people watching these recordings after, or watching these streams after they'd been made. So whereas up to now I've been sitting talking with people live, kind of responding to the comments, I thought because some people seem to be checking in on the streams after they've been made, that I could address some issues, some questions, some topics that might be relevant to some people in their lives. I'm going to try and do this with a bit of background music. Hopefully it's not too distracting. But buckle your seatbelt. Actually, a better way of saying that is sit back and relax, because we're going to do some contemplation today. Now, what that means is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with meditation. Contemplation is a sister or a brother or a partner to meditation. Contemplation is used for addressing very specific problems. If I give you a metaphor, imagine you walk outside into an open field, a park, we would call it, just a big giant lawn, if you want to imagine something in your head, and you see a boulder. And so you walk over to this boulder, I don't know, maybe it's the size of a car, small car. And you walk around the boulder very slowly, and you're looking at the boulder the entire time, taking everything in. You're not letting your attention wander off to anything else that may be around you in the vicinity. This is contemplating the boulder. So you're keeping your attention on the boulder the whole time, and you're moving around it, and you're looking at it from many different angles, but it's the same boulder, and you're looking at it from many different perspectives because you want to gain an insight into the nature of this boulder. So this is, you could call this contemplating the boulder. So what we're going to do today is a live contemplation of this problem of the core trauma of the self. What's happening? Hello, Doc Catsy. Welcome. It's been a long time since I've heard that. How are you? You're here from YouTube, aren't you? From the Chill and Play Games channel. Welcome. I think you are. Maybe. So what I'm going to have to do is, I won't totally ignore chat, but because we're doing a contemplation here today, that means contemplation is all about focus. I can chat and engage, but I'll just keep bringing it back to this problem that I've become aware of. Some people seem to be having an issue with. The problem of the core trauma of the self. Now, this is a tricky one because it's actually a fundamental flaw in psychotherapy. I mean, psychotherapy is extremely effective to a point in dealing with specific traumas, specific issues. Trauma's not really what I'm trying to say, but in dealing with specific issues, psychotherapies can be useful depending on the specific approach. But there is a core trauma which psychotherapy can't reach. So we're going to do a little bit of contemplation around this. just to see if this might help transcend this problem. So bear with me, alright? Relax, settle in, and let's see what happens. So if we're looking at this question of the core trauma of the self, it presupposes or assumes that somewhere along the lines in our life something happened which fucked us up. It screwed us over, we were okay, we were fine, and then something occurred which sent us in a downward spiral and traumatized us, and from that moment on we had this core trauma apparently, which often, or we think, leads to our unhappiness or our misery. And so people can and do try to go back to see if they can gain insight into this core trauma experience and hopefully liberate themselves from the pain that they're experiencing in life. People can spend years and years and years doing that. Oftentimes uncovering many traumas, many anxieties, many issues, many worries, concerns, and oftentimes bringing about positive transformations in their life. Good stuff, healing, so to speak, but they're always left unsatisfied. To that person, it's almost as if there's still something there, there's still some problem, there's still some issues somewhere. There must be a core, there must be a deeper problem that they haven't resolved yet because they're not happy, they're not content, they're not at peace. Maybe they have a little bit of peace, but it's fleeting. It comes and goes, and so they continue to seek, to try to go deeper. But I have to ask, what if the self is the core trauma? Through deep inquiry into the nature of existence, which is the spiritual objective. What am I? How did I come to be? What is this? What is life? How did it get here? All of these questions. Side effect or sidestep, what happens when we die? All of these sorts of things. But the core of this, the core of all of these questions is the fact that I exist. I'm here. I perceive myself to be. What if that is the core trauma? Now, the only way to truly and fully gain insight into that question, to answer that question, is to go beyond it, meaning, if that's the case, if myself is the core trauma, then I must find a way to transcend myself, or at least my perception of my own existence. That's what spiritual enlightenment is about. That's the ultimate healing of the mind. Now, I can be direct because I know the specific person that's giving me inspiration to this contemplation isn't afraid of, the work of self-mastery and self-exploration. I won't go into any names, but there's a specific element of a desire for healing of the body and mind, which the body and brain, so this person struggles a little bit with the term mind, which is fine. It's very difficult to get your head around what mind is. Mind is not the thinking. The thinking is taking place in the brain. Mind is the all-encompassing energy of life, life itself, mind, which is what you are. You are the energy of life itself, operating through a brain in a body. Inside the brain is all of the labels, the names, the opinions, the judgments, the beliefs, the views, etc., etc., the conditioning, cultural conditioning, environmental conditioning, emotional processes, etc., etc., all of that inside the brain. Now we're looking to try to heal the brain and the body. Which means, from that person's point of view, there's something wrong in the brain and the body. If we settle the self, meaning the psychology, the perceptions of my name, my label, my opinions, my views, which is the purpose of meditation. Through practicing meditation, eventually our attention is taken out of the brain and into the mind itself. When that happens, any sense of a problem disappears, dissolves. So while we inhabit this body and brain, if we perceive ourselves to be this body and brain, as in, this is me, this is going to be quite deep. I'm not sure if maybe many people watching this aren't particularly used to this kind of language, but it's me that's contemplating this after all, so, this is what you'll hear out of my mouth. Anyway, back to the point. Let's say I perceive myself to be this body. Immediately with that perception comes, well, the reality of death, doesn't it? If this body is me, then this body is also subject to pain and stress, anxiety, and eventually death. I am born, and I know I will die, and that's quite a scary situation, isn't it? To think that that's what you are. But through meditation, we step out of that. That's just a perception, mind. That's not a reality. That's a perception. A good example of that is how people can believe themselves to be all kinds of things as a body. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I have multiple genders, I have multiple conditions, psychological or otherwise. All of that's all relative and changeable. You can change your mind, so to speak, next week. So that's not what you are. Anything that can change so easily is not what you are in there watching this experience. That's certainly not the core of what you are. It's a part of you, it's something you're aware of. But there's something much deeper that's witnessing this experience, and it's not limited to the body and the brain. So, if we come back to the function of meditation, which means powerful and direct observation, watching, through sustained watching, which means watching for a long period of time, watching intensely for a sustained period of time, there comes an immediate awareness of total self, meaning mind, not just the label, the identity, the thinking, not just the body, but perception of mind itself, which is a cosmic reality, a cosmic force. If you go very deeply into perception of mind, the self that suffers disappears. The entity, we call it the ego, that thinks it is alive in the body, dissolves. And that core trauma of a self is gone. The mind is set free. Now, trying to get back to the point of the healing of the body and the brain, which is very important. The more you're entangled inside the body, the more you're entangled inside the brain, the more perceptions build up into this so-called self, this me that is here in this body. As this body, if you believe that you are the body, you are subject to death, subject to pain. These are all traumas. They have memories, traumatic memories, terrible, often horrible experiences. I'm not going to talk about the really positive stuff because people don't go seeking healing for positive experiences. They go seeking healing because of traumatic experiences, terrifying, horrifying, not nice stuff. But all of that's contained within the self of the body and the brain, this personality, this so-called personality. When the mind, which means you, this real thing that is present, when you operate in a way within this body and brain where that self does not arise, this means living without ego, there is no trauma to be healed. There is only experience unfolding now. There's no memory. Memory doesn't occur in that space. This is called living without perception of self, living without self, or no self. Which, realizing this, is the function of meditation. That's what meditation is for. Coming into contact with the reality, the actual reality of no self, the absolute reality of no self, not the personal opinion of what you think reality is, or your opinion of what reality is, but the actual thing itself, direct contact, within which there is no self that suffers. So, to think that you are the body and the brain, and that you have an identity within this body and brain, is to give rise to the trauma. Well, that is the core trauma of the self. But to operate in a way where that doesn't happen is to remove the core trauma of the self, which then allows the body, well, it functions naturally, totally naturally in presence. And there is a great relaxation that happens in presence, which is powerfully healing and transcendent. Totally transcends all forms of human suffering, including pain. Even if there is pain in the body, mind rises above these things and operates above them. And from that perspective, letting the body relax deeply, in deep meditation, which is actually, from your point of view at that point, just living, heals any kind of pains, discomforts, so-called anxieties, etc., etc. Because nothing is holding on, there is no self-grasping at those things. So, anything less than this is temporary and illusory, meaning where there is perception of self, there is trauma, because that's one and the same thing. So you can't heal the core trauma of the self while there is self. So dealing with self then, meaning the perception that I exist, means living without perception of self, which again is the aim of meditation. So there's no other way to really cut it, so to speak. That the only answer to trauma, psychological trauma, or rather the ultimate answer, is spiritual enlightenment. There's no other way to cut it. You can set about trying to govern the body and the brain in a way where everything is to your liking, and then say you have peace and that you don't suffer. And that may be the case temporarily for the time being, that you don't experience conscious misery, the kind of misery that it's easy to recognize. But when one of those elements collapses, or somebody dies, or you get sick and you can't control those things anymore, and so along with those things goes your peace of mind and the reality of inevitable suffering of the self arises. So now there's nothing wrong with balancing your life in that way, the body and the brain, but to think that that's a cure to the core trauma of the self, or just suffering, is another way to put it. That's a lie, that's a delusion, that's not possible. Even if you lived an entire lifetime with all of those things in balance, when it comes time to die, to leave the body, the reality of your situation would be unavoidable. And of course, if you're not prepared for death, and you've never looked into the reality of leaving the body at the end of its lifetime, well, that's a scary prospect for anyone. So ultimately, you have no choice if looking to, what did we say, cure the core trauma of the self. There is no option but to totally transcend and rise above it. So, I could probably talk a little bit more on that subject, but often it helps to be engaged. Sometimes the point hits home, and hopefully years of misdirected effort are saved. You or that person is saved from years of misdirected effort. I suppose we could go a little bit into the experience of transcending the self. So when this moment is watched, it is observed directly without any kind of interpretation or analysis. There is only a detached observation of experience itself without identity. there is a happening occurring in presence, the present moment happening now. What actually takes place when that is fully realized is a total identity with present moment, not as self. And obviously the present moment contains all of life, everywhere, every being, every object, every form of matter, every state. You could call that the true self if you wanted to, but it's not an idea, it's a physical and non-physical direct experience of the present moment. It is happening. That is not an idea of self. That is not living with an idea of a self-identity. It is living with the actual experience of life unfolding, the actual identity of life itself, reality. That doesn't suffer. How can a galaxy suffer? How can a cosmos suffer? It is just unfolding as it is. But to think that you're a human being inside that cosmos is to be subject to all of the various forces that are within it. Time being just one, gravity, etc., etc. Stress, death, birth, etc., etc. So, you have no choice to realize this. In order to see this, you must dive very, very deeply into the present moment. That's the purpose, the function, and the process, living process of meditation, real meditation. Powerful and direct observation of the present moment. But the present moment is extremely deep. There's a lot going on right now. And of course you have to sustain that because the present moment doesn't stop, you know. Some people come into contact with the present moment for a fraction of a second and then immediately revert back to the thinking about the present moment. So all of the suffering and misery comes back. The present moment doesn't end. And so if your intense observation of the present moment doesn't end and it is sustained, then you are in touch with reality directly. But the very second that your attention leaves what is happening and goes back into thinking about what is happening, you're now back in an illusory self which is subject to stress and suffering, which we've already described. So maybe you can identify that my language now, it's becoming kind of not cyclical, but it's orbiting this idea, this principle of the need to totally, absolutely crystallize a powerful, direct observation, awareness of presence. And that is one with living without self-identity. So how do we do that? Well, the funny thing about that is you're already doing it. If you look at what is occurring right now, wherever you are, if you take in the present moment totally, that's it. Of course, there's nothing to understand, because how can you understand the present moment? It is happening. Are you looking at it? Are you with it directly, without interpretation, without analysis, even without contemplation, actually? We're just doing this exercise in contemplation, hopefully for the benefit of someone suffering. But once that ceases, there's no need to contemplate, obviously. There's no problem. Just direct experience happening. What's the problem? It's as natural as can be, obviously. It is what you are. It is what you have always been. And it is what you will always be. But habitually, we tend to paint over the present moment with views, opinions, this self again, this identity, ego, you know. So the practice, if you want to call it that, we talk about practice in the traditional circles. We talk about the practice, meaning something that must be practiced, something that must be developed and cultivated, the practice of presence, pure and powerful presence. And if I like to add a little cherry on top, it's a deep relaxation into presence, being present and relaxing into presence. It's how you learn to sustain it, because there's a part of you that's, you could say, is almost trying to turn away from the present moment. It's not, it's just trying to understand the present moment, which is its job, the brain. But it tends to get, if you stay in there too long in the understanding, it tends to get pretty stressful. So you step out. Non-abiding, meaning, well, you're just everywhere. Awareness is everywhere. It doesn't abide anywhere because it is everywhere. Can't get stuck. Ultimately, it can't get stuck. Alright, so perhaps that covers the perceived problem. I thought it might be nice to do this as a little bit of an exercise in contemplation. Contemplation is only ever used for and useful for eradicating problems, addressing a problem, and figure something out. It's strategic to contemplate a specific issue, means to look so deeply into that issue that the issue dissolves. Now the issue is no longer there. So the mind, which is you, can go back to being peaceful. If we're considering the healing of the body, relaxation, deep relaxation, and letting go is never a bad idea. Healing of the brain is impossible. It's not possible to heal the brain because the brain isn't actually traumatized. The brain is perfect. The brain is doing exactly what you've told it to do, exactly what it's being conditioned to do. But to perceive a problem with the way your brain is operating, which tends to be the result of identifying with the brain. Here's the thing, if you identify with the brain, you know at a deep level that that's a lie, that's not what you are. And so you live in this kind of, why does this feel off? Why does it not feel complete? Why do I seem like I have this problem and I can't put my finger on it? It's because you're identifying with the wrong part. So if you live with a self-identity, you're always going to have that deep discomfort, that deep, what is it? Well, there's something wrong, there's something I'm not getting. So when it comes to healing the brain, just let it be, let go, step out of it. You'll realize it wasn't actually broken, it wasn't actually traumatized. You've just been using it wrong. Or rather, let's just say you forgot something about your true identity. Which, and I'll probably end it here because Obviously, I'm sitting in a room talking. Hopefully, this might help someone. I don't know, but at this time, for many of us, speaking as a human being now, alright, planet Earth 2023, it's really wonderful that lots of people are beginning to reflect, wanting to reflect, wanting to consider this question. What exactly is going on here again? What's happening? What are we doing? Why are we here? What's the point in all of this again? Because I'm not sure if I understand it. Society seems to be getting crazier and crazier. Things are blowing up all over the place, which is amazing. And so, to recognize, yep, that's happening. We're doing this. And it's time for many of us to correct ourselves, if you want to put it that way, collectively. Collective correction. So anyway, I don't know, this is nice, isn't it? It's a good thought. Yeah, thanks, Dark Catsy. I thought I'd do a little bit of an experiment and just see how it turned out. Sometimes you see somebody struggling, suffering, and there's a when you're in touch with yourself, let's say, you are this force that wants to end suffering. People call it love, you know. It's like when you see a child that's crying, there's a part of you that just immediately, upon sensing that, wants to hold that child and remove their tears and help them smile and make them smile. You don't even have to try, it just comes up. And so, you know, when you encounter someone who's just a little bit stuck, they're not even that far from their own peace, you know, they're very close to it. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, you can't help but just try, you know. Sometimes it falls on deaf ears, and that's fine, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change you. You can still be that expression, that hope, that kindness. So sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to express yourself, you know, if you want to put it that way. Try to help. But this problem of self-identity is really quite wonderful, because it's everyone. It's every problem. It's every problem in life. Okay, there are practical problems. How do I earn enough money to pay the bills? That's practical. But if you've got yourself in order, so to speak, even that's easy. Even that's doable. Everything's possible. So, yeah, that's all I had to say, really.